I'm so glad that you're here. We're really excited that you're coming to Baylor. What I'm hoping to do this morning is give you a broad understanding of what our degree plan is like, and to give you some tips on advising, thinking about studying abroad, thinking about a minor, and answer some of the questions that you might have. So, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can do with a social work degree too. But I'm Lucy Ramos-Hoppy. I direct the undergraduate social work program. So I spend about half of my time teaching in the undergrad program and our graduate program, and then about half of my time running our undergrad curriculum and curriculum mapping and making minors and lots of real nerdy higher ed things like that make me happy. So this is a picture of one of our cohorts in Austin at the state legislature. So we send our students every year to do policy work, and social work is a professional program. So I think most folks are a little more familiar with a program like nursing, or a profession like nursing or speech pathology. Social work functions a lot like that curricularly. So we are named after the late Diana Garland. She was one of my professors. She was our inaugural dean, and the Department of Social Work started at Baylor in 1969. Preston Dyer founded the department, and he just stopped teaching the year before last. So we're actually housed downtown. I'll show you a picture of our building in a second. But social work is a protected title in Texas. That means that you can't just be a nice person and want to care for folks in poverty or who have some marginalized status and call yourself a social worker, or be in social services and call yourself a social worker. Social workers in Texas are licensed through the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's a very, there's a lot of jurisdiction over the profession, and there's a lot of guidance over our curriculum from the Council on Social Work Education. So you have probably been served by a social worker and you didn't know it. So something that I tell my students is that it's not very common for students to graduate and they go work for a company or an organization that employs all social workers, or for you to be served by a social worker and their name tag or their business card says social worker on it. The exception to that would be if you work in a hospital setting, which a lot of our students end up doing. So if you went to work for UT Southwestern, it's a really big medical system. You might, if you're at Dell Children's or something, there's going to be a department of social work there. But aside from that, these are some of the names of positions that social workers end up in. Social work is very broad. That is one of my favorite things about it, because especially it's a favorite thing about it for me as a practitioner. But in higher ed, I think it's really helpful because y'all are really young to decide what you want to do. So you're 18, 17. So that pressure or stress about picking a major can be pretty high, right? Like you have a permanent ink pen and you're about to sign your name, like sign your life away, kind of that feeling of, I hope I make a good decision, because if I don't, I'm kind of stuck. A great thing about social work is that you can make some pretty significant pivots and not go back to school, which right now, before you start school, doesn't sound like a real deal breaker. But I promise, when you are 25 and you decide, I really thought I loved this, and I don't know if I love it as much as I thought 5 years ago, not having to go back to school is a pretty big selling point. So we have students who come to social work who are kind of all over that spectrum. So I would say a large percentage of our students come that want to be therapists. Over half of therapists in the United States are social workers, which most folks don't know. Most people think that you have a psychology degree, which can be true, but social work is a pretty direct measurable path to having a therapy practice or being in what we call clinical practice. And then on the opposite side of that would be parts of the profession that we call macro. So I'll talk about levels of practice in a minute. But I might have y'all sitting in class together and one of you wants to be a therapist and the other one wants to go write policy for a think tank. And our curriculum is going to take you both to where you need to go. So you might be like a big picture person, or you might be more of a one-on-one person. We have an internship experience, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and sometimes that helps our students really kind of separate out what their interests are and realize, I thought I was really here for one-on-one, and I just can't imagine listening to people talk all day. It would make me want to pluck out my eyelashes. Or I really thought I wanted to work with kids, and I think I might be allergic to kids. So I need to switch. Or a surprise, like I never saw myself in hospital social work or doing hospice, and I really love it. So our curriculum gives students some pretty good exposure to help narrow that a bit. This is a picture of our building. So we are housed at 8th and Washington, which is right downtown. Y'all are from big enough metro areas that if I say you can just ride your bike there, that gives you an idea of how close it is. It kind of depends in orientation. I have folks that think Waco is big. I'm from Houston, so when I moved here, I was like, is that it? Did I drive through the whole thing? My husband's from Chicago. He really was confused. So it's small. It's a small space, but a good one. I think you'll take most of your courses freshman and sophomore year on main campus, and then your core social work courses at our downtown building. And we're there with some other departments and parts of the university that are community facing. So the sleep psychology lab is downtown with us. The Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty is a grant engine that works on food insecurity. They're housed in the same building with us. And you'll be in an internship 16 hours a week your senior year, and so you'll appreciate being a little bit out of the Baylor bubble and being able to kind of zip in and out real easily. There's not any parking issues downtown like there are on a college campus. We have a pretty wonderful faculty to student ratio. I would say that's true for Baylor in general. That's been true for Baylor for a long time. I did my undergrad here 20 years ago. One of my selling points for coming to Baylor was the smaller class size, and that's something that we've been able to maintain over the years. You will have bigger classes, especially your courses that everyone takes, like over half the freshmen take English 1310. Your English 1310 is going to be big. But as you get into your area of study, those classes get smaller. Our benchmarks in our sections are probably around 20 to 25 students per section. So I really get to know my students. I know if my students are allergic to peanuts, or if their mom came to visit, or if they got a new pug. I had a student that got a new pug named Pearl last year, and she was real cute. So having that ratio is helpful. A lot of our content is not easy on the heart, especially. I mean, we're studying about populations that are suffering. We're studying about hard diagnoses. And I think it's helpful to have those smaller classes so that we can really ask those hard questions and sort through what's hard as we approach a topic. We have a 5-year program. So we're an accredited school, and then our MSW program has an advanced standing option, which many but not all accredited MSWs offer. And so what that means is that you get sort of grandfathered into grad school, which you might not be thinking about grad school right now, but it will be here. You'll be thinking about it before you know it. So a BSW student in good academic standing will get automatic admission into our MSW program. And then our senior year curriculum in the first year of the MSW are sort of the same in some ways. So you're operating at a graduate level by the time you're in your senior year with us. And we credit you that curriculum, which is part of the good academic standing piece. So I would say about half of our seniors end up staying with us, and they finish that 5th year, and in 5 years they've knocked out all of their schooling unless they're going to go on and do doctoral work, which is pretty fast. Most advanced standing programs are longer than ours. Ours is 10 months. So we have students that they go on to do their MSW and they want to pick a different institution, which we support. And we're also really happy when our students stay with us. Do you have any questions about that? There's no silly questions. I meant to say that at the beginning. I know I feel this way, and I work in higher ed, and it's all the little abbreviations and the numbers of the classes, and it's just a lot. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. We have a few joint degrees. So we have a lot of students that are pre-law, that do their undergrad, and their aim is to go to law school after. We have students that end up in like a master's in public administration program or a master's in public health program. We're working on an MSW MPH joint degree, and we have an MSW MBA. So I have some students that I have known since they were y'all's age. You know, I saw all the way through undergrad. They knocked out their MSW in a year. They finished, the programs inside of one's institution can sort of talk to each other, so to speak. And so then they knocked out their MBA in a year. So they finished 2 graduate degrees in 2 years, which is not an easy thing to find. So that's just good to keep on your radar as you get past this point of just getting here and start having some of those longer term conversations.
So you do or do not have the MBA and the MSW already?
That's already set up.
Already set up.
Yeah. Okay. I had 2 students just finish their MBA. They finished their BSW in 2019, their MSW in 2020, and their MBA in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if she were to go for her MSW, sorry, I have to get the right acronym. That's okay. MSW, how does it get linked in with the MBA if she starts with that?
That's a great question. The schools direct you on what to do first. We also have an MDiv MSW with the Truett Seminary. Mm-hmm. With the MBA, I'm fairly certain that the suggestion from both the business school and the School of Social Work is to complete the MSW first. Because you're basically in that course sequence your senior year.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So when I'm teaching a first year MSW course and I'm teaching seniors, my seniors are ahead of my graduate students until about February. It takes my grad students till about February of their first year to catch up with my seniors. I tell my seniors that too, because they're tired by that point. And I'm like, come on, you're lapping the grad students. They're going to catch up with you mid-spring semester. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The last thing I'll say on this slide is we're accredited through the Council on Social Work Education. That's who directs our curriculum. So an example would be when y'all go to the doctor, you are assuming that the nurse has, like, all the nurses are required to take these certain classes, right? And it doesn't matter where they went to school. There are all these rules that we're assuming are in place. We don't want the nurse to be like, I went to nursing school and it's called a nursing school, but it doesn't have the seal on it. But you'll be fine, right? You would hightail it out of there, or at least I would. Social work curriculum works similarly. So we are preparing students to work for high-risk populations with folks who have a lot going on. I'm going to teach my students how to assess for suicide. And every single BSW student through an accredited school will have learned that. So I don't doubt when I send you into the field that you have what you need to be a competent practitioner. The one addition that we make at Baylor is that we have a competency on faith and ethical practice. So that is our understanding that that faith, and I don't always use the term faith, so I would use terms like faith, spirituality, worldview, what you believe or don't. Sometimes that's cultural. That piece of the human is important to incorporate into social work practice. So that's an extra competency that we measure curricularly. Okay, I'm going to talk about degree planning. And I know you're so excited. And I'm going to get a little excited when I talk to you about it. And y'all are going to think she probably needs to get a hobby. Have y'all already had your advising appointments?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use your advising appointment well. And it's okay that you already had yours because you're going to get advised every semester. I recommend that students make an appointment with themselves before their advising appointment. So it's kind of like when you go for your annual checkup to the doctor and you leave and you're like, I meant to ask them for allergy medicine, but since I'm not having my allergies right now, I just forgot to ask. Advising is kind of like that. So, put that on your calendar. If you talk to your parents about what you're taking next semester, having a touch point with them is helpful. Some students do that, some students don't. But that will help you come prepared to your advising appointment to ask some of those questions. There are no silly questions in advising, and I want students from a customer service standpoint to reduce their stress, to graduate on time, and to make the most out of their tuition. And preparing for advising will help you do that. So I'm going to go through the next couple of slides on the core courses that you take in our degree plan that are housed in the school. So we have other required courses that are not housed in social work. But I think one other thing I'll say is just planning early and asking those questions early will save you, it will prevent stress, and it will save you time and money. So ask early. If you're thinking about studying abroad or you're thinking about picking up a minor, that's great. Go ahead and ask about it now, because when you have 8 semesters at least ahead of you, you've got some wiggle room there. So part of the game in advising is figuring out where those gaps are in your schedule that you could build in other opportunities. So y'all will be taking, I don't know if you will be registered for this since you're undecided, but if you're pre-social work, which there are multiple majors at Baylor that come in as a pre-major, you will register for the New Student Experience course, which everyone calls an NSE, but they say NSE, and then you don't know what they're talking about, or at least I didn't. And I work here. So y'all might also have that. So an NSE course is, every academic unit has one, and that's their 1101 course. So that's like, it's not intro to social work, that's a separate course, but it's an introduction to the major, and it has information for freshmen about Baylor. So every single NSE will have some info about that academic unit, and then some info that's just intro to the university for students.
So there's separate NSEs for every?
There's separate NSEs, yeah. And if you're undecided, I'm not sure, I think you can probably pick what NSE to take. I'm gonna grab a chair. And if our NSE is full, you can email me so that I can make sure that there's a seat for you. If you, we're also kind of a discovery major. This is kind of true for a lot of majors, but if you didn't sign up for the NSC, it doesn't mean you can't major in social work or can't enroll into the intro course. That's fine. We have our degree audit set up to where it doesn't ping you if you didn't take the NSC course. So you'll take that fall of freshman year. And then sophomore year, you'll take intro to social work and then human diversity and leadership. So the 2320 course is on a distribution list, which means that students from all over the university take that course. So it's not just social work students. So those can be taken concurrently, or you could take one semester and one the next. And then the junior year is really what I call the heart of our curricular sequence. And I know that the numbers, all the acronyms and numbers kind of get lost, but the easiest way to to think about these courses would be to think about a practice sequence and a theory sequence. So human behavior and the social environment, we call that HBSE, HBSE, because we don't like to repeat human behavior and the social environment over and over. But we have a HBSE 1 and a HBSE 2, that's our theory sequence. In HBSE 1, you learn about lifespan development. So if I have a client who is 10 and they are making bad decisions at school, I will tap on what I know about, what is Erickson's theory on appropriate development for a 10-year-old, what's Kohlberg's moral development theory, how does that inform how that client may be approaching their opportunity for good or poor decisions. Okay, so we learn the theory behind that, and that goes from birth or what happens prenatally through the lifespan until death. And then HBSE 2 is a theory course that is a macro theory course. So we learn about why people behave in mass the way that they do. So we study theories like social construction, social behavioral theory. We study about how power and oppression function in society, about how people keep power or spread it out. We study consensus organizing or conflict organizing and why mass groups of people do or don't do the things that they do. So that's a much, it's not bigger because it's better, but it's a more of a bird's eye view from a theoretical standpoint. So that's a fall and spring theory sequence, and then our practice sequence, students take practice 1 in the fall, and then they take practice 2 and 3 in the spring. Our practice 1 course, the fall is pretty micro, but that's our term that we use in social work for that one-on-one. So in practice 1, I teach that course. I'm teaching my students, it is a lot like a communications course. So you will become great at talking to people and listening. You learn about elaboration skills, so how do I get a person to say more? You learn empathic skills, so how do I show a person compassion through, how might they engage in self-compassion in our conversations? It's real beneficial for your personal relationships, so that's a bonus. I have students like, I'm doing so much better with my roommates now that I'm in this class. I'm like, that's good. We learn about containment, so we also learn about when not to say something, and which is harder, especially for a verbal processor. And we learn about what we call tuning in process. So what do we know intellectually and affectively about human-to-human engagement? So how might I be experienced by others? And sometimes our experience, what we think others experience of us is different than their actual experience of us. So there's a lot of self-awareness work that goes into that. So there's about, maybe 70 specific skills that you end up mastering in that course. And we give you pretend clients to work with, which is really fun. So if you have a theater background, this might be your shining moment, and if you don't, you're going to be fine. And then our practice 2 and 3 courses are practice skills to lead groups. So we teach students the different kinds of groups. So how do you create and lead a support group, a task group, a coalition, a board of trustees, and then the practice 3 course is how we work at the big organization and community level. So if I work for the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, how am I going to get the Flower Mound Chamber of Commerce and the South Lake Chamber of Commerce to talk to each other and come to some agreements on common issues that we're having in our area? So that larger scale type of work. Yes.
I do have a question. So you said that these are all happening in junior year, and
That's
that
right.
the theory is happening in the fall and the spring, and practice is happening
In the fall and the spring.
So you're learning the theory and practicing it at the same time, but as you're learning the theory, I'm trying to understand, so like, you're learning the theory as you're going that whole year in the fall and spring.
That's
Are you
right.
putting it into practice at the same time as you're learning the theory?
You'll put it into practice your senior year in your internship. You're learning all of your practice skills and models at the same time.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's a great question. So, so learning how, like in my groups class, we run pretend groups. So we'll run a grief group, and you come to class, and everyone is pretending to be a client, and you're the social work practitioner, and you have to lead the group, and you walk into the classroom. It's kind of like a lab in that way. As if you would in practice. So we give you a lot of space to try all of that out before you're with actual clients your senior year.
But they're not like matched up. It's not like what you're learning in 3351 is exactly what you're doing in practice.
No, because they're
separate
theory and models.
Yeah, they're separate things.
That's right. But they do inform each other,
Yeah.
right? So I'm learning engagement skills in 3371, and I'm learning about humans and theoretically what do we know about the human experience. And we kind of braid those together. We do a pretty good job of having cross-curricular conversations, so having our classes talk to each other, not really, but the professors talk to each other so that we know. When I'm teaching HIBC 2, I teach that macro theory course. I know my students have not learned circle processes in practice 3 yet. So I'm not going to reference that yet, but I know by the end of my course they will have learned that practice model. So I'm going to tee them up on the theory side to learn that practice model. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yes. Okay, so earlier you said that the Intro to Social Work class would be taken during the sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scheduled for that for freshman fall.
Okay.
So is that still like okay, or?
It should be, and sometimes your advisor might have done that depending on how many hours you're coming in with.
I'm communicating with you.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. So, one thing to remember is what your status is by hours versus by year. So if you enter and you're over 30 hours, you're going to get kicked into a sophomore status earlier, and that might be why. Yeah. But that's okay. That's okay to take it earlier. Or to take it spring of your freshman year if you wanted to do that. Any questions about these courses? I know I just am like fire hydrant information at you. This isn't your only chance to ask questions, so. I will say junior year, these are the required courses that are SWO, so they're housed in social work. You're also required in social work, we require more science than any other non-science major at Baylor. So you're going to take bio, chemistry, neuroscience, which I just think is so fun. For real. That was my favorite class outside of my social work sequence as an undergrad. Okay, because you need to learn that if you're going to be a clinician. So when I finished grad school, a lot of my day was spent reading psych meds. So I really needed to know my neuroscience to be in psych meds world. So you take an economics course, and you also have your other, what we kind of call basics, right? Like your foreign language requirement or your religion requirement or other things. But you have those 6 hours in the fall, and then 9 in the spring, but then those other gaps are pretty full of the other required courses. So if you're looking for room, like study abroad time, picking up a minor, the best time to plan for that is in that freshman, sophomore year. I would say best time for study abroad would be sophomore year. A lot of times the study abroad programs require that you're a sophomore, because then you get into the heart of the curriculum, and it's pretty hard to duck out off campus in that way. Senior year, you are in an internship, like I mentioned. So we have a course that gives you your academic credit for those hours. So those are your social work 4491 and 4492 courses. That is a course where you stay with your professor, and the other students in your actual class all year, which is rare to have. And we think really important because the internship experience is a pretty big learning curve. So we schedule the other required social work courses knowing that most of our placements, like right now, this could change in a few years, but right now most of our placements, our field office is communicating with them that it's best for our students to be in their placement on Tuesday, Thursday. So most of our courses for our seniors are offered Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we do what we can on our side to make that work for you. We have a matching, kind of like a matching process. We have a pretty big field education office. We have an online MSW, so we have internships all over. The senior internships are local. We try to keep them within the 30-minute radius if we can. There's some exceptions to that when we have like a rural placement. But you're in a seminar that is attached to that experience, and then there's a data analysis and research sequence that you take fall and spring, and a policy course that you take. Our students are also required to take a social work elective, and those vary depending on the semester, but they're often in our faculty members' areas of expertise. So we have a gerontology elective, we have a child welfare elective, we have a child maltreatment elective.
So since psychology is no longer required for the social work degree, would that be considered an elective now?
No, it would be it might be considered an elective on your big degree audit.
General elective.
But not in your major.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So they change each semester as to what those choices might be based on it?
They change every year.
Oh, every year. Okay.
We have a trauma, loss, and mourning elective that, sometimes and those kind of depend on what other things faculty are slated to teach. So, maybe we'll offer that loss and mourning class every other fall, or we rotate which semester it's offered.
Okay.
And then we have some electives that are cross-listed with other departments. So this year we had an elective on racial disparities in healthcare, and that was a joint course with social work and medical humanities. So we have some different creative things like that we offer. Any other questions about these courses?
Not about the courses in specific, but so the difference between a counselor and a therapist is counselors don't have the ability to prescribe any medication, and therapists sometimes can if they have that specific ability. I've only ever heard that if they have a psychology degree. Mm-hmm. So is there an ability or a certification I need to do, or do you still have to do those extra years of schooling in order to become a therapist who can prescribe medication?
You have to sit, well, it depends on your academic background. Mm-hmm. So if you majored in psychology, you would need to go all the way through a PhD to sit for licensure. If you major in social work, you can do your 5th year MSW and then go sit for your clinical board. And then you can hang your own shingle, which is not a professional term. You can hang your own shingle as a therapist, so you could bill insurance on your own. So, if you do something like an LMFT, some of that is when we start taking a major, a study sequence, and we put it next door to certification and professional licensure. That's really important to pay attention to. Social work's a faster path to licensure, and it's a broader path to licensure. So if you want to be if you're a student that's like, yeah, I'm interested in counseling and therapy, if you go the LPC track, that is a track, or the LMFT track, that is a track. If you do that is more narrow and specific, that's not bad, it's just more narrow and specific. So if you change your mind in your LMFT program, you're kind of there, you've picked your zone. If you change your mind in social work, you can decide, I've listened to people for 10 years and I want to go do macro scale things, and you can do that and not go back to school and not go sit for another license.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's like just the easier way of doing it in general when it comes to like the length of time and the ability to move around if you wanted to change your.
I would say length of time is different between psychology and social work.
Yeah.
Length of time is if you do a traditional grad school, like if you didn't major in social work and then you went to get a 2-year MSW, that's about the same amount of time as an LPC or an LMFT.
Okay.
But
the accelerated thing with the fire. I mean.
But that's right. So I don't know that there's an accelerated option because the undergraduate background for the other licensures are not in professional programs.
Oh, okay.
So people are majoring in something like psychology or sociology, which is a discipline, but it is not a profession.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But if you wanted to be sit for licensure or whatever you're talking about, certification, are you still going to have the same number of hours? Like if you wanted to be a counselor or therapist, you have to have so many hours.
That's a good question. So you're going to clock yes, you still have to clock clinical hours. So, but you don't have to go back to school. So those are two different things, right? Because we don't issue licenses. Only the association, the licensing boards can do that. Yeah. So if I wanted, I hold an LMSW. If I wanted to be a therapist, I could, but I would need to bill insurance under an LCSW or a psychologist or a PhD with a license, with someone else with license. You could also have a PhD and no license, which is not what you're looking for. You still have to do that licensure piece.
Okay.
But if I decided higher ed is not for me, all these students, what am I doing? Which I don't think. I could go clock my clinical hours to hang my own shingle.
But while you can work under, you just have
That's
to work
right.
under, like being a real estate agent or
That's
a
right.
broker.
So I would go into a therapy practice.
Mm-hmm.
I would bill under another psychologist, someone else who holds a clinical license from a varying discipline. And then I could go own my own business and do it once I have my clinical license. Yeah. That help?
What?
It's a lot.
It feels like you can do more of a stepping stone type scenario.
Right.
Rather than
You're just
going
not
straight to
thrown in
Right.
and your license and you
Right.
have to figure it out.
So if I wanted, say I was still really passionate about the things that drew me to counseling, but I didn't really want to be in direct practice anymore, it's easier to pivot into one of those more macro types of jobs with a social work degree than with one of the more narrow clinical degrees, because they don't require courses like we do around studying and managing and operating large groups of people, because they're focused on now, with the exception of groups, because those clinicians run groups. And some students know that. They know that an LPC track is their way to go, and they choose a more broad, non-professional undergrad degree. My question with that is, I still have students who don't know. They do a major like child and family studies or psychology, and then they end up in an MSW program, and they've got to do 2 years of their MSW, and they could have fast-tracked themselves, if that makes sense. But I'm obviously very partial to social work.
Well, it sounds like, much like the business school, that if you start with that and you actually continue, you're going to be on track.
It's going to fast-track you in some way.
And if you've made that decision early on.
That's right. But you can change your mind, right?
Yeah.
So you can get through. We have students who, they get to their senior year and they've been thinking this whole time that they want to be a child and adolescent therapist. And we go send them to be with the children and adolescents in their internship, and they're like, that is real interesting for people that aren't me. Or I'm really passionate about that, but I want to work in the policy area. Like what really got me up in the morning was these educational policy issues. And I liked talking with Johnny, but I could only do that for half the time. I really want to go I really want to go write some policy about that, or be in a job that is sort of a hybrid, where they can do some time with clients and some time that's more macro.
Is there the ability to be like a general counselor necessarily without being a therapist? That's not, it has like a narrow idea, like the specialty, but you can do other types of counseling as well. Is there like a general one like that?
I would say they're all kind of general, and then people do certifications or areas of
more
emphasis.
specific. Okay.
So we have areas of emphasis like that in our MSW. So one of those is trauma-informed care. So we have a lot of students who come in, they want to be a therapist or not. They may want to do something more macro, but they're really interested in that area of trauma, or they're really interested in integrated behavioral health, and they want to have it. That is a specific certification that hospitals and clinics are looking for right now. They want an LMSW with an integrated behavioral health certification, and you can get that certification while you're getting your MSW. Or you could have an emphasis in diversity and pick a certain population, or congregational work. We have a Center for Community and Congregations that's housed in the School of Social Work, so they do research and writing on all sorts of things that are related to faith and congregational life. Anything from like clergy sexual misconduct and calling people to accountability in this really big area to how congregations can be community partners. So you have a community school down the street from your congregation. How can we help train ministers to facilitate those kinds of relationships? Yeah.
A couple questions. One, how large is your program? Like, how many students are in the social work?
We have about 45 students per cohort right now, so it's pretty small.
Okay.
We graduate about 45 undergrads at each May. Our graduate program is much bigger. And part of that is because we have a residential program and we have an online program.
And there's really no, a bachelor of social work without going on to the SW is not, no one does that, pretty much.
People do that. You just can't make as much money with a BSW as you can with an MSW. So that's a big, it's a lot more limited, and you cannot become a therapist, you cannot hang your own shingle, you cannot do diagnostic work on your own just because it doesn't include that advanced practice level.
Do a lot of folks who don't go on, is because they're going in another path, like law or something else?
Yeah, so they'll do law school. Like this year, I'm thinking about my 4492 course, so my seniors that were in my internship seminar. About half of them are staying at Baylor for their MSW. I had one who decided she wanted to teach, so she's going to be a teacher in Waco ISD next year. I had about 3 go to law school. I have 1 or 2 per year, I would say, that go on to do a more macro level graduate degree, so like a MPA or an MPH. I have students who want to work, but they want to go to grad school, but they need or want to work in between undergrad and grad school. So it kind of depends.
And then when they go back, they can't, since it's like this program is 5 years, when they go back, they have to go back for 4 years.
If you do it, the Council on Social Work Education, their rule right now, which hopefully they're going to change it, or they make it, I guess they could make it more generous, but right now you're only eligible for an advanced standing program within 5 years of completion of your BSW. So if you finish, and you're in good academic standing, you're out of school for 10 years, you're going to have to go back and do a traditional MSW.
But if you needed a year or 2, you're working.
And I have students who do that. They want to stay in Waco, or they want to stay at Baylor. They come, they get themselves through undergrad, they go into practice for a year, and then they come back to grad school and knock out grad school in a year.
I kind of just more like a social work question, not necessarily specific towards the degree planning or schooling, but you said that when we looked at the list, there were many different jobs that weren't necessarily like medically related, but
Right.
one of the requirements is to like have different sciences and
Uh-huh.
analysis of different things. How exactly does that work if you have a social work degree, but you're not necessarily kind of using it in the medical sense, but do you use that
That's
in
a
the
great
daily, or
question.
just kind of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of that is the baseline information that we need as social workers to work with humans,
Okay.
having the human experience. So I need to know, even if I'm not working in hospice, I need to know some basic information about death and dying to be a good social worker, because I am going to work with someone who is interfacing that in their own life, or that's they're dying, or they have a terminal diagnosis. A lot of that is developmentally what's happening in a human, and then being able, I kind of view it like building blocks. So when I'm in my MSW and I'm learning about, or I'm in my senior year and all the clients that I get have to meet a certain DSM diagnosis to be served by my program, then I need some of that bio, neuroscience, chemistry background to, it's almost like making a shell for me to put that diagnosis in. So if I'm a school social worker and I'm working with a student that has ADHD and they come presenting behavioral issues in the classroom, I really need to have some basic bio neuroscience background to be able to have appropriate context for that diagnosis. Or if they have sensory issues, for me to really understand from a biological standpoint what those sensory issues are triggering for them, and how I maybe can't engage a certain practice modality until they get a basic biological or physical need met. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I don't know if y'all have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
So it's like the triangle, like self-actualization is at the top. Be the best you can be, right? That's self-actualization. The very basic part of Maslow's hierarchy is safety. So if I'm working with Jane and Jane is hungry, I can talk to her about her relationship with her child until the cows come home, but until she eats something, her body is not going to let her have a high-level cognitive conversation that's effective for her. So I really don't, I could study all of those cognitive behavioral theory, or really have all my skills built out from the junior year courses we talked about. But if I'm not really understanding some of those basic things where biology and neuroscience and social work practice merge together, I'm really going to miss serving my client appropriately. So that's kind of the why. So that was a real physical example. But some of the, we have other ones that are around things like moral development and decision-making capacity, or being able to make an assessment about the capacity of a client, or why people, understanding addiction and how addiction functions from most students who are drawn to something like social work, they will be like, oh, I'm really interested in that interrelationship dynamic. But before we get there, we need to kind of talk about what happens chemically in addiction, and how can that inform our practice.
What type of minors would you suggest for somebody who's doing major in social work?
I think it depends on what you want to do and what you're interested in. So you can minor in anything. Look, it's like you saw my next slide. And I know we're over time, so I'll let y'all go quickly. But we have 3 minors housed in the School of Social Work. You don't have to minor. If you pick social work, you don't have to have a minor, and you don't have to pick one of these. So we have students who do all sorts of things. They minor in business. They minor in nonprofit management. They minor in photojournalism because they love photojournalism. And that's if they're going to spend time doing it, they might as well pick up a minor while they're at it. So that's something to ask in advising early. Or, kind of set some time for yourself to comb through the course catalog, which is very, very long. kind of overwhelming, but to look, they're all housed in an academic home, so you can kind of, I think like, oh, something businessy, like I'll go look in the business school section of the course catalog and see what minors they offer. Yeah.
And you would suggest that that be taken care of pretty quick on?
I would ask about it
professional
early.
stuff? Okay.
So, you know, I have because what you don't want is that you pick up a minor and then you hear from your advisor, you can do that, but you're going to graduate a year late. That's a lot of money and time for a minor, right?
Yeah.
So back to the money, time, and stress thing that I mentioned earlier, everyone's favorite topics, money, time, and stress. Asking that early will help you see, oh, I'm going to be required to take this number of general electives anyway, and if I have room and I, you know, placed out of courses or I got transfer credit or something like that and I have room, then I could build a minor in there if I wanted.
What are the job prospects in social work right now? Is the field growing?
Yeah, it's growing. The MSW is really neck and neck with an MBA right now on jobs out of school. So my question, I think, if I like fast forward 4 years when I will have a freshman in college, is like, what is this baby going to do when she's done? Where are we going when we get off of the school conveyor belt? Some of that is the way that mental health and medicine are expanding so much, and realizing that the mental health component is essential to medical work. And that is true for social workers who don't really necessarily see themselves in the medical field. And then the way that HR departments are shifting. So they have shifted over the years in a way that has expanded the kind of like the employee assistance program part of HR is getting populated by folks with a mental health background or a social work background, which is really interesting. Some of that function of HR that has become, when you think about the history of it and then what it's become more administrative in some ways. It's gone this way and it's left some gaps for folks with a background like social work. Law schools really like to take social work undergrads. You learn about humans, and you're going to work with humans at some point, and you learn how to those communication skills. So it's interesting because it is specific. It's a specific discipline and profession, but it has some really big threads from multiple zones in it. There's just not a lot of degrees where you're going to get some of that kind of what I would call clinical background, and then you're also going to learn about something like grant writing all together.
Okay.
So it's normal for a student, if you really see yourself on one end of the spectrum or the other, just trust us when we're taking you through the portion of the course sequence that you're like, I am not here to write grants. I'm here to be a therapist. And it's like, that is great. And you are going to have to fund your practice. And we want you to have some of those, what some folks would tag like a business skill, or a lot of executive coaching. My husband is in business, and he's like, this executive coaching. I'm like, that is social work, babe. Y'all did the social work thing, and you call it executive coaching. So some of those are kind of cousins. He's really good at executive coaching, so I'm not going to knock him, but they do really bleed together in terms of skills and background.